From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. The time we spend indoors exposed to artificial light is limiting our ability to regenerate our cells and heal our body naturally. This is episode 431, and our guest today is Carrie Bennett. Carrie has a BS in biology, a master's in nutrition, and is a faculty member of the Quantum Body Collective. Today, she talks about everything under the sun, or rather, about the sun. Carrie covers the many benefits of natural sunlight, how it helps heal our guts, sync our circadian rhythm, and set off a cascade of proper hormonal function, and much more. She gets specific about the hormones that get turned on, so to speak, when we are in the sun, and she explains their effect on our mood and body. She also goes over how those who are fair-skinned or sun-shy can approach getting more sunshine. She even has advice for those whose eyes are especially sensitive to the sunlight and feel like they need to wear sunglasses all the time. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to the Wise Traditions Conference this October in Kansas City, Missouri. The food is always Wise Traditions friendly and absolutely delicious. The people are down to earth and beautiful, and the speakers are out of this world, including Tom Cowan, Alex Zeck, Naomi Wolf, and of course our very own Sally Fallon Morell. This is the conference that nourishes in every way, so join us. Go to wisetraditions.org to find out more and to register today. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Carrie.
Thanks, Hilda. I'm excited to chat with you today.
I am too. Not to chat with me, but to chat with you. Because this quantum health space, it's so important for people to understand that the most basic things that nurtured our ancestors nurture us as well, and we may be overlooking them. I want to kick things off, Carrie, by asking you about the story of that young man who was in such digestive distress, his parents didn't know what to do. Talk to us about what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't oftentimes tie light exposure to gut health in any way. And so when this mom came to me, her son, he was probably about 7 years old at the time, and she had tried everything under the sun, except the sun itself, about things like, okay, what elimination diet do I need to do? What are his food sensitivities, food allergies? Let me take him through a 4R gut health protocol, and basically everything. And this poor kid was still waking up vomiting or vomiting after meals, horrible stomach pain. And you could also tell that he was severely malnourished, not because they weren't feeding him nutrient-dense foods. He wasn't able to absorb any of the nutrients. And so he was really a lot more stunted on the growth scale. And the mom was just desperate. And so the way the universe works is amazing because she just happened to move in as my neighbor. And my kids found out there was other kids in the neighbor's backyard. They legitimately tore a hole in the fence, right? And so finally one day it was like, oh, hi, yeah, I guess we'll meet. And so she started sharing the story, and she started kind of hearing how I talk about sunlight and health. And she was like, do you think this will help my son? And so I said, I do. I've seen circadian rhythm and sunlight be so transformative to gut health. And so we started applying some simple strategies around when to go outside at key times to get the natural light signaling, touching the earth with bare skin, and also blocking artificial light at night. And within 3 weeks, this kid transformed. He was keeping all of his food down. He was having normal bowel movements. Obviously, it took months to reestablish growth, but you could clearly see that he was pulling in the nutrients. The hair was growing, the skin was shining, physical signs of nutrient deficiencies were going away. And it was all in response to circadian health because she had done everything else. And she was missing this. And it was just so beautiful to the extent that now she wants to become a practitioner in this to help other people with this life-changing experience that she had.
A fascinating story. And I want to follow up on the bit where you said that our gut health could be linked to our circadian rhythm, or rather that it is. Can you tell us more about that and how the amount of sunlight affects that circadian rhythm and gut health?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of different ways it does. But first and foremost, I want to establish the fact that every cell in our body has a clock built into it. And that clock is basically designed to say, okay, based on the time of day that I'm perceiving, I'm going to optimize certain tasks. And so the gut is no different. The gut is really tied to a circadian rhythm, and its circadian rhythm and its function is tied to the clock in our brain, the central clock in our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that is linked directly to the light entering or not entering our eyes. So basically, light enters my eyes. My brain perceives that as a time of day. It oscillates in certain ways to tell time to every cell in my body, and my cells sync up their tasks to that. And so my gut does the same, right? It's really syncing up all of its tasks. And specifically to gut health, with my background as a clinical nutritionist, I learned in school that it takes about 3 weeks for the gut to start healing itself. And it turns out when someone has an intact, I call it an intact circadian rhythm, the gut can heal itself every 2 to 5 days. It can turn over and repair and regenerate so much faster. And what's missing these days is the fact that the absence of light is the signal to regenerate. And our exposure to so much artificial light at night really then limits our gut's ability to regenerate itself and to heal. So when we allow that signaling to happen and the melatonin to elevate and the repair to happen when one sleeps, the body can heal so much more quickly.
Fascinating. But I'm thinking about how, is this why we like to eat popcorn during movies or start munching when we're watching TV? Because we're getting a light signal that's informing our body and those little clocks in our cells that it's a different time of day than what it could be outside?
Yes, absolutely. Because with that artificial blue light, we get a surge of cortisol. And cortisol is the hormone that signals, oh, the day is starting. Go fuel yourself, right? Now it's a new day. It's time to go find food. And then we actually also see the suppression of melatonin. And so you're exactly right. There's so much that ties to the light and we don't even realize it.
And I've even heard you say, Carrie, that human beings are in essence like batteries made from water charged by sunlight. Talk to us about that.
This is like my favorite topic of all time. And this, I always like to pay homage to people who I've learned these things from. And so this really ties in the work of Dr. Gerald Pollack and Dr. Jack Kruse and Dr. Alexander Wunsch and just Dr. Maywan Ho, just some beautiful minds in the space of what I would probably call biophysics or maybe even applied biophysics. The body is made up of so much water. And for a while there, Hilda, in all of my learning from both undergrad and graduate school, it was just, oh yeah, the water is there. But it's really not biologically impactful in any way. You know, it's a solvent, it's inert, it's just there. And open a textbook and like you look at a cell sliced in half and it just looks like a little pool of water that the mitochondria and organelles are swimming in. And it turns out that the water behaves so much in so many ways. It is what allows us to have the level of function that we have as humans. And one of the ways we do that is because the water inside of our bodies, specifically the water that the mitochondria make at step 4 of the electron transport chain, that water, anytime it comes into contact with a biological surface, which is also called a hydrophilic or water-loving surface, the water organizes itself and rearranges itself into a specific molecular patterning that Dr. Pollack has termed exclusion zone water. But what I want listeners to picture is hexagons of H's and O's, where the O's are at the vertices of these hexagons, the H's are in between. So it's a very ordered molecular arrangement. And in order for water to take on that very ordered molecular arrangement, it has to kick out a hydrogen. And so what we now see is that then when water takes on this ordered exclusion zone form, it has a negative charge, which is very much unlike water in a glass when the H's and O's are just interacting at random. That's neutral. And as we know, a hydrogen, that would be a positively charged entity. That's almost just exactly like a proton. And Dr. Pollack's research showed you could put a little tiny micro needle, a microelectrode in the exclusion zone that's negatively charged, and a little tiny microelectron in the proton zone that's positively charged, and you can light a light bulb. And so that is how we actually know, that was the starting point for understanding that the water in our bodies is a source of potential energy that we can use to do work. And it looks like it really helps with protein folding and unfolding. It helps with optimizing the shapes of cellular receptors, so many things. And we now know too, that exclusion zone, that negatively charged battery, that area of negative charge expands in response to certain frequencies of light, specifically infrared light. And so because the sun at any time contains approximately 50% infrared light, it means we can go out into sunlight, absorb that infrared, which does penetrate deeply into the body, and we can legitimately charge our exclusion zone water batteries in order to provide extra potential energy with which the body can do work.
So going back to the story of that young man at the top of this episode, is it possible that he simply wasn't getting enough sunlight to not only inform the kind of clocks in his gut about what time of day it was and what needed to happen there, but it wasn't structuring the water properly in his gut, and so that's why he wasn't absorbing the nutrients and all the things?
Absolutely. And so that structured water, that potential energy, we say that the only way that we get energy is from food. But I think that's about 1/3 of the equation, and a very important 1/3 of the equation. But what I think we're designed to do is extract energy. And in my essence, energy is electricity or electrons, electron flow. And so that's what happens with exclusion zone water. That's what happens with earthing. And it actually is the same thing that also happens when sunlight strikes the skin. You actually get what's called a photoelectric effect, or a generation of electrons. It's what happens with movement, electron flow. And so what I think he was lacking in, and what a lot of people are lacking in these days, is the fact that they're not maximizing their energy efficiency or their other sources of energy. And then when you have a gut that can't absorb nutrients and food appropriately, that would also be lacking. And so they all go hand in hand in a healing journey just to support a very energy-rich body.
Well, and I'm just thinking about how most of us live. We're in front of computers, and then we go home from work and we're watching TV. And so we're getting light, but it's not the full spectrum. It's definitely not the infrared light that the sunlight has to offer.
Oh, that's exactly right. So that's really lacking. The two light frequencies that I think are the most biologically impactful in a beneficial way are the infrared range and the ultraviolet range. And modern living basically separates us from all of those because those are now being omitted from light bulbs. There's no more infrared in our light bulbs anymore, and there was never any UV to begin with. And modern window glass blocks it as well. So the frequency ranges that we were really tuned into using for beneficial purposes are missing in most modern indoor environments. Hence why I feel like so many people are depleted in so many ways these days.
Well, they're missing in our modern indoor environments. And then when we go outside, we've been told to cover ourselves up, to wear sunglasses, to wear sunscreen, to avoid the UVA and UVB part of the spectrum. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that's just as important as the infrared.
It absolutely is. Yeah, we've definitely villainized sunlight for a long time. You know, Hilda, I dove into that research, like, why did we villainize sunlight so badly? And, you know, back in the day, late 1800s, early 1900s, there were two camps of researchers. There were the researchers who were running these heliotherapy or sunlight therapy clinics who were touting, like, sunlight exposure heals tuberculosis, infection, all of these beautiful things that they were like, it helps with your bone health. And then you had this other group of researchers that was using arc lamps and studying light in that way. And an arc lamp, it's like a welder's lamp, right? Where you just get a very narrow portion, yet intense portion of UV light. And they were saying, but look, when we apply UV light to these cells, it mutates the DNA and causes damage. And so they were kind of going back and forth at it. And you can guess which group kind of ultimately won, if you will, in terms of quote unquote proving that UV light causes cancer. But really, they were studying UV light outside of its natural spectrum. And that makes all the difference in the world. So when we apply sunlight correctly, because we have the balance of the spectrum, we can actually derive so many health benefits from it.
Well, as I was preparing to talk to you today, Carrie, I was looking at some of your information and your resources out there. And I noticed that you said that natural spectrum that you were just referring to, the whole shebang that the sun offers us. And I don't even think science can necessarily wrap its head around all of the varieties of light that could be in there. But as far as we understand it, that natural spectrum, you've said, helps regulate hormonal function. Can you go into detail about how you think this happens, which hormones are impacted by the sunlight and what they do for, let's say, our mood, our concentration, our inflammation, and so forth?
Sure, yeah. And there's actually a lot of different pathways that this happens. But the specific range of light happens with the morning light and the changes and how the sun layers itself on with morning light. So I think this is a very key message for people to understand. And that sunlight is never stagnant in the blends of colors it has. You have a certain blend that then you add on more and more with the UV, or you add on brightness, or you add on intensity as the sun reaches the high point in the sky. And then those frequencies start to go away. The sun is ever changing. And it looks like there's a couple of key transitions. And again, you hit the nail on the head. There's no way are even coming close to understanding what all the frequencies of light do. We're at the tip of the iceberg. But what I can say clinically, it appears as though sunrise is a really key time to get outside if at all possible. And I've got this dorky little light meter, right? That my kids actually like using it too. They like going around the house with it. But it's this meter that you shine it outside and it tells you the exact blend of the colors that are in your environment. And at sunrise, you start to see that the intensity of blue matches the intensity of red and infrared. And that's a signal to kick off this pathway from the hypothalamus that tells the mitochondria to make pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is like this master hormone, the steroid pathway that can become cortisol. It can become all of our sex hormones, DHEA, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. But it kicks off with that light signaling in the brain, step one.
So what I'm thinking is, when you said sunrise, I nodded my head because I'm used to getting out in sunrise. But I bet some people were like, sunrise? Is this lady crazy? Like, I never see sunrise. I wake up so groggily. I either stayed up too late or my baby was crying in the middle of the night. Like, it's like you're talking from another planet about getting that sunrise sun.
Yeah.
But it maybe if instead of reaching for coffee, if we got outside, we would get the right amount of cortisol, or that hormone that you were saying that can generate that cortisol, which would give us energy for the day.
That's exactly what it is. I find that's one shift that people notice pretty quickly, is that their need for caffeine in the morning to feel energized shrinks drastically. And that's exactly because you're making adequate cortisol levels in response to the fact that the brain says, oh, the day is starting. Carrie needs a lot of energy. Let's roll. Let's do this. So that's absolutely something that comes into play. And I have found, because I'm a mom of 3, right? So I have found that even on the nights where my kids are waking up because they're sick in the middle of the night, or there's bad dreams or potty breaks, whatever has to happen, that when I go outside first thing in the morning, I still get the energy. It's better than any cup of coffee I could possibly imagine in terms of how it transforms the energy without the crash that you can get from caffeine. So it's such an underappreciated source of energy that really is sustainable, and then also kicks off and coordinates so many pathways because the light's a signal. And so you're getting such an added benefit. You know, don't get me wrong. Listen, after I go get my sunrise eyes, I still have a cup of coffee. It's like my little slice of heaven, right? I do love the taste and the smell, and I get this beautiful coffee. It's just kind of a little morning ritual for me. But I don't rely on it for energy like I used to, because I use light in the way that I think light was intended to be used.
Coming up, Carrie describes what she calls brain magic time, the time when the spectrum of sunlight helps our body make serotonin, the feel-good hormone, dopamine, and more.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Pluck seasoning. You've heard me talk before about the importance of eating organ meats. Hands down, they are the most nutritious foods on the planet that support nearly every system in the body. Yet I know, despite our best intentions, we don't always take the time to source and cook organ meats regularly. There is an easy and delicious way to microdose organ meats daily, and it's with Pluck seasoning. Pluck is a mix of 5 100% grass-fed, freeze-dried powdered organs: liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas, and organ spices and herbs. It's as easy as seasoning your food. Plus, it tastes exceptionally good on everything. It's so versatile. Enjoy Pluck on vegetables, meats, fish, eggs, bone broth, popcorn. Yes, popcorn. Even salad dressing. Simply add the desired amount as you cook or on your finished food. Pluck has even got a zesty garlic blend that has no nightshades. And for those that just want the organ meat nutrition without the salt, spices, and herbs, you can get Pluck Pure, which is a 100% organ meat blend. Add it to your smoothies, your drinks, or anything you want a little extra flavor on. For a limited time, the Wise Traditions audience can get 20% off their order by heading to eatpluck.com/wise, and that gives you 20% off automatically. So head on over to eatpluck.com/wise and get your order today. And Optimal Carnivore. They have a revolutionary new product, Brain Nourish, that combines grass-fed beef brain and lion's mane mushrooms in a groundbreaking formula. It is the ultimate whole food nootropic to build a better brain. These two ancestral superfoods have been combined in convenient capsules, and both ingredients have been shown to support supreme focus, elevated mood, improved memory, greater clarity, and enhanced creativity. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to get 10% off your order today. Optimal Carnivore has a grass-fed organ complex, grass-fed liver, bone and joint restore, and the new Brain Nourish. So again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 at checkout. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. This natural sunlight, especially this early morning spectrum of light, can really give us energy, wake us up for the day in ways that are perhaps unexpected to most of us, especially if we're not sunrise risers, so to speak. And I've heard you also say that we can get serotonin from the sunlight. Is this particular to the sunrise sun or sunlight anytime?
No, it's not particular to sunrise, but actually another key transition in morning light is the appearance of ultraviolet light. Because there's a certain time where there's no ultraviolet light present. And if anyone wants to kind of map it out, it's from when the sun is sunrise to when the sun reaches something called 10 degrees above the horizon. So the sun has to rise high enough in the sky for the ultraviolet wavelengths to penetrate into the environment. And that transition actually really, it's what I call brain magic time. And so it's a little later in the morning, but it's still morning light. And what we now know is that there's this massive pool of what we call aromatic amino acids in the eyes. And, forever people were like, why do we have aromatic amino acids in the eyes? Like, what's the point of that? And I was listening to a talk by Dr. Wunsch, and I've heard talks from Dr. Cruz, and it connected all the dots. These aromatic amino acids are called that because they've got this ring-shaped structure. And what we know is that these ring-shaped structures actually are full of electrons. And electrons interact with photons. They capture photons. And what does a photon of light have? It has energy. And so these aromatic amino acids ultimately capture this more intense UV light because the light wasn't that intense at this point in the morning. And so as soon as the presence of ultraviolet A appears, these aromatic amino acids get energized or kickstarts these cascades to transform them into something else in the pathway. So something some people might be very familiar with would be tryptophan, would be one of these aromatic amino acids. And in America, we say, oh, I'm so tired after Thanksgiving dinner because I ate too much turkey. It has so much tryptophan, it makes me tired. And it's true. It's a groggy. It's calming. It's a calming neurotransmitter. And so it's why sometimes we might be a little groggy in the mornings. But as soon as we receive those energizing UVA rays, that tryptophan gets energized to become serotonin. And we build up this serotonin store in the morning. And we know the benefits of serotonin in terms of like mood and focus and concentration. Other aromatic amino acids like tyrosine, same thing. They capture that UVA light. Tyrosine can improve thyroid hormone function. So T3, T4 signaling or release. It can improve production of dopamine. So it optimizes dopamine in the brain. It optimizes norepinephrine or noradrenaline. All of these brain chemicals that we recognize are meant to make us really motivated to start our day and feel focused and energized and boost our mood. And we get it from light. I mean, there's other pathways too, Hilda. I could go on, but it's just amazing.
It is amazing because it's all there for the taking. And yet, Carrie, it's like we think we have to pop all these supplements and I guess get on the treadmill or keep working even though we're feeling fatigued and maybe having poor digestion. It's like we don't realize that this nutrition, so to speak, for our hormones and for our entire body is well within reach just by stepping outside that front door.
You're absolutely right. When I first got into learning about this, it seemed too good to be true. And it's like I needed to understand like this really deep level of science for me to be like, okay, I'll go outside in the morning. And then it was just like, after 3 days, I was like, oh my gosh, there is something to this. Like this is feeling transformative. So it's really amazing, but people want a device or they don't recognize the importance of light beyond maybe making vitamin D. So it's just really, I'm excited to bring this message deeper and farther.
I'm wondering too, Carrie, if we get accustomed to our state of being. I'm saying that because when you're like, oh, okay, I'll go outside, you sounded kind of begrudging. And I think we've all been in that place. But our children too, when we're like, hey, go outside, they're like, no, I don't want to. What is it that makes us resist actually taking the wonderful opportunity of getting this recharge from the sun?
There are so many things indoors these days that have a bit of an addictive quality to them. the blue light from the screens themselves, the need for a notification of someone liking a post, or like there's so many things that keep us inside. And also, I just don't think I never grew up in a culture that was like, go outside because it's going to be so beneficial to your health. It was more like, okay, go outside, go play with your friends. It's summer. And never tied it to health beyond just maybe vitamin D 20 years later. I never ever thought it was something that would be beneficial for my body or beneficial for my health. And it's easy to be comfortable and stay indoors. For a while there, I don't know about where you live, Hilda, but in Michigan, people wait for like the perfect time to go outside, which in Michigan is such a small window of the year. It's like, no, it's too cold in the winter. Oh, spring's still kind of rainy and damp. Okay, May, we'll go outside in May. And it's like, oh, I feel so much better when I go outside. But there's the deeper connections I definitely didn't make to realize, wait, I can get that benefit year round if I just prioritize it.
Well, so let's talk practically right now, Carrie. Given our internal resistance and our devices kind of calling our name and looking for those likes or whatever, given all of that, what are some simple things we can do to prioritize getting outside? I know you've said, for example, maybe if we work near a window, opening that window up so we get the full spectrum of sunlight. What else can we do?
Yeah, that's a great way to go. I mean, especially also even first thing in the morning, if you can just crack open a window and just look outside, the signaling just has to be kickstarted. So this is the coolest part about this, because light signaling in the body works via a process called non-linear signaling. And that's another concept that's not familiar to us in this world. We're very much linear in terms of like, okay, if I need to get stronger today, I'm going to do 3 push-ups. Tomorrow, I'm going to do 4 push-ups. The next day, I'm going to do 5 push-ups. And eventually, I'm going to reach the amount of push-ups where I feel strong, but I have to keep adding on more and more and more. And that's not the case with how light operates in the body. Light needs the stimulus. It needs the signal. And then these pathways get kickstarted and these cascades happen. And so that's why I tell people 30 seconds of sunrise into your eyes every single day is better than 30 minutes once a month by far, because you just have to kickstart those pathways consistently.
That's really helpful.
Can I tell you something that's really been transformative for me too?
Yes, because that's what I was going to say. Give us more. So leave the window open, get outside first thing. What else?
Part of my sunrise practice, a majority of the year, is windows open in the car, cracked open in the car. It's, can I schedule a phone call outside in the morning at some point as part of my work, right? Because we always do it. Is there a menial task at work that requires me to just get a bunch of stuff off of my list, but I don't actually have to be at my desk doing it? Schedule those and do them outside, even if it's just for a little 5-minute window sometime during the morning. And I found pound for pound, if people can take a little break during what I call UVA rise, which is when the sun is 10 to 30 degrees above the horizon. And there's an app, it's called the Circadian app, that programs your location on the planet and tells you exactly when that is. I find going outside and prioritizing something outdoors in that window of time, a walk, a phone call, a little bit of stretching just to take a break, is really been key to helping people see shifts in or improvements in their health in a smaller window of time.
Yeah, because I've heard that all disease has its root in mitochondrial dysfunction, and our mitochondria count on that energy, on that information, if you will, from the sun to function properly. Isn't that right?
Well, absolutely, because there's I made the connection between UV light and then thyroid hormone optimization. Thyroid hormone dictates a lot of what mitochondria, how much energetic output they sense and are able to do. The sunlight will actually help the mitochondria do something called build their membrane potential, which results in more ATP production, more water production in the mitochondria, which we then structure into that battery of exclusion zone water energy. So you're exactly right. There's so many benefits that we can derive from this, from mitochondrial health and more. It just needs to be done consistently. That's the key.
And what's coming to mind right now is something a friend told me recently, that people are like plants with more complicated emotions, because don't plants, we see them actually stretching toward the window, stretching toward the light, wherever they are. The leaves will even turn. Isn't there the Fibonacci sequence, these things that happen with the plant where it's trying to maximize its solar panels to receive the spectrum of light? Aren't we the same way? Can you compare somehow photosynthesis in the plant to how we synthesize the light's information?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very much like plants, and plants are so smart. We could learn a lot from studying plants, because when the light is there, like you said, they expend energy to get more of it. And when the light's gone, they fold. They're like, okay, no need. Now it's time to regenerate. We're not going to waste energy. There's no need. We can learn a lot from plants. So yes, absolutely. So the sunlight strikes the skin. We make exclusions on water. But there's melanin pigmentation in our skin as well. And this is a whole really unexplored path in terms of what's happening with our exposure, our interaction with light. But melanin absorbs all wavelengths of light. And so anytime we go outside, if the sunlight strikes our skin, melanin actually causes a water molecule to split. And that water molecule, when it's split, it actually becomes molecular you derive molecular oxygen, which is an electron donor, and molecular hydrogen, which is an electron donor and also a selective antioxidant. So from sunlight exposure on the skin alone, we can actually start to extract energy from water, which then we can use throughout our body in the same way that a plant splits water as the first step of photosynthesis to ultimately make glucose, right? We do the same things in our bodies, just a slightly more complex way, and we've got more pathways in which we can actually utilize the light beyond photosynthesis. But if we can start to understand our bodies in the same way, we have to be more engaged with our light environment in order to thrive.
And Dr. Price even noted in his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, that a lot of indigenous people would only get dressed when they went into town, meaning that they had so much skin in the game, as Dr. Jack Kruse liked to say. They had so much skin exposed to the sun, they were getting that benefit. This was not the focus of his book, but he noted it in his recording of all the people groups he visited around the world, actually.
I think even more so than clothing as well, sunglasses are a really big topic. And it's a hot button point that are really separating us. Because even when we're outside, we're potentially still blocking the light signaling. I used to love sunglasses. I used to have such sensitive eyes. I had a bout of adrenal fatigue. It was more than about, but made my eyes super sensitive to the light. So anytime I went outside, I felt like I would have to shield them. And I was actually, by shielding my eyes, I wasn't getting any of those brain boosting benefits that I talked about earlier. I didn't feel any better in the light going outside because I just wasn't tripping or initiating those cascades and those pathways to make the serotonin, the dopamine, the adrenaline, the noradrenaline, all those feel-good chemicals, beta endorphin. There's so many things that we can make from light through the eyes. And so sunglasses are one that I really encourage people to ask themselves what their relationship with sunglasses is and to see if you can take them off at any time when you feel comfortable. And I've had clients with migraines who physically have to start with 30 seconds at a time, sun migraines, but they've done it and they've been able to reestablish it.
Is that what you did too to get over your sensitivity?
I started with early morning light because it's dimmer, it's more soothing, didn't feel as bright to me at all. Then there came a point where I would wear a hat to kind of shield the intensity of the sunlight, but still because light travels like a wave, right? And so it'll get around the hat, right? And the light signaling will still go into the eyes the way it needs to. And so I would wear a hat. And now, middle of summer, it's a rare instance that I need any sort of protection for my eyes in the form of hat, just because I'm so accustomed to the light now.
I have had so many people say to me, oh, but I'm fair-skinned. It's easy for you to say I need to get more sunlight, but I'm sensitive to the sun. What do you say to folks like that?
That used to be me too, right? I used to burn all the time in response to sunlight. And it's because I wasn't using sunlight appropriately. The typical way that I was applying sunlight, Hilda, back in the day was, okay, I'm going to work all day. I owned a gym, so I got up really early and 5 a.m. artificial lights were on and here I go and I work all day. And then on my drive home after work, I would have my sunglasses on as I was driving. But then here comes the weekend. And all of a sudden it's a gorgeous day outside and I'm going to just go to the beach or I'm going to be outside all day. And I would fry myself. Oh. And it's because the sun is meant to be layered on our bodies. We build what Dr. Kruse calls the solar callus. And once I really recognize that if I can really slowly and gradually adapt my skin to the increasing amount of light, both from morning to solar noon, but also throughout the seasonal variations that we see as well, I tan so well. And so do all my kids. I've seen this happen time and time again in so many situations where people used to burn until they allowed their skin to adapt to the light. And through the eyes, we make it beyond those brain chemicals, right? If we get the light signaling into the eyes, we make specific sun protection factors in our skin. We make urocanic acid. We make melanin. We make histamine. All of those things are actually both sun protection factors. And then the histamine creates a little pinkening response that says, okay, Carrie, You've received enough direct sunlight for the day. Go ahead and put your cover up on or whatever it is and get yourself out of the intense direct sunlight. And when we listen to those signals and we cue them in sequentially, you tan.
That's really helpful. Carrie, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your story now, because you've alluded to the fact that you were not as attuned to the sun when you owned that gym, even though apparently you were trying to live the healthiest life possible. Tell us a little bit about your understanding in this quantum health space of why the sunlight is important and how you grew in that understanding.
Yeah, sure, Hilda. I found sunlight because I had tried everything else. And so what ultimately happened with me is I had always kind of had some little health challenges, joint laxity issues, insomnia bouts from my 20s to the age of 30. But when I was 31, I had my first child. I just developed the worst fatigue I could possibly imagine. I kind of poo-pooed it. It's like, oh, this is a new mom thing, right? We all feel like this. Yeah, so what? I can't keep my eyes open. No big deal. Just kept on getting worse in spite of all my best efforts, including the fact that I went to get a master's degree in clinical nutrition to try to heal myself. I was like, okay, it must be my gut. It must be my food. I thought my movement was perfect. I thought I was doing everything perfectly. But the feeling, and I'm certain some of the listeners can understand this, the horrible feeling was this idea of I'm exhausted during the day. And then as soon as I want my body to go to sleep at night, I feel wired and I have insomnia and I actually can't get into the deep sleep. So that was why am I not sleeping? My kid wasn't sleeping at the time. They're like, what's going on? He's like doing exactly what I probably shouldn't have been doing, but I'm grateful I did it at the time. That's when I stumbled upon one of Dr. Cruz's blogs. I think I understood maybe 5% of what I read at the time because it's such an intense amount of information in a short amount of time. But I was like, wait a second. No one ever told me that my light environment made any difference whatsoever. I started to dive deep into all the biophysics. And finally, I was convinced, okay, let me start doing this. So I started just legitimately opening up a little back patio door and looking outside at sunrise. When I would go to the gym in the mornings before sunrise, I would wear blue blockers. In the morning, I would take what I called my circadian walk, and all my other trainers there knew it was Carrie I just did legitimately a loop around the block. And then I got back into the light. That typically coincided with UVA rise. And within a matter of 3 days, I felt a difference. Not only in my energy, it's like this fog, this veil got lifted, but also I finally was able to sleep again. And I added in blocking artificial light at night, and it was such a profound effect in such a short amount of time. It's when I just knew I had to make it my mission to share this with people because it was so transformative and pretty simple too.
Yeah, it's interesting for those who have more of a nutrition focus to suddenly realize, oh, our food also takes in light information. This is something Cruz taught me, that our produce and our cattle and chickens, hopefully, they're all out on the pasture and they're getting the sunlight. So they're like light transformers for us. So of course it makes sense that we too are light eaters in a sense.
Absolutely. The light plants capture, right? They store that light, which is why certain plants only grow in certain areas. I'll never be able to grow a pineapple tree in Michigan. Pineapples, bananas, nothing like that will ever grow in Michigan where I live, even if I try to tend to it with the best interest in the plant, because we don't have the intensity of sunlight to do that here. Yes, you're exactly right. What we eat releases light, and it releases the light signature of where it was growing. And that actually has an impact because those electrons in what we eat ultimately go to the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria get the electrons as an input, but they also get the light as an input. And it dictates to those mitochondria kind of, okay, some seasonal aspects of where we are. It dictates something called reactive oxygen species production. And all of these things can either help the mitochondria in terms of making them more functional, more efficient, or making them more dysfunctional. So, it's why people have probably heard Dr. Cruz say eating a banana in Boston in the middle of January is like the stupidest thing you could do. And I don't think it's the stupidest thing you could do. Now, I do definitely understand what we eat is directly tied to our light environment, or that's how it was, right? We ate things that we found hunted, gathered in our environment.
Yes. And of course, all the people Dr. Price found around the world, the healthiest people were eating the food that was from that light environment. They weren't eating food that was imported in from afar. And that's one reason they were thriving, probably. So this has been a fascinating conversation, Carrie. I want to close now to pose to you the question I like to pose at the end. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, one thing, maybe a small step in the direction of better light hygiene, if you will, what would you recommend that they do?
I always say, just try to get outside in the morning or open windows and just change your relationship with morning light. Just recognize it as such a healing source and try to engage with it as much as possible. And even little bits matter. So even if you think it's just 30 seconds and it's not worth it, that's false. Go outside or just get your eyes to the natural light, and it can make all the difference in the world.
100%. Thank you so much, Carrie. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Hilda.
Our guest today was Carrie Bennett. You can visit Carrie at carriebwellness.com to learn more. And I'm Hilda Labrador, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me and my resources at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent podcast review from Apple Podcasts. Mike Aya gave this review the title Amazing Truth. I love this, as it is very hard to get access to this information in a culture that purposely hides these things. These truths aren't just our past traditions. They are the way mankind has survived for so long. I just want to shout this podcast to the rooftops and share with everyone because of how much I have learned in just a couple of episodes. Mike Aya, thank you so much for this review. If you'd like to leave us a review, go to Apple Podcasts, click on ratings and reviews, leave us as many stars as you like, and tell the world why you like the show. And thank you in advance. And thank you too for listening. Stay well, my friend, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.